hi, and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Sarah, and this is Wicked Reading. It's that time of year for reading BookTube's favorites, and this is going to be my installation and my contribution to the trend. So in today's video, I will be reading BookTube's favorites. So, criteria in approaching this. So for me, I kept it very simple. Criteria's somewhat low in terms of I didn't watch hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos and actually figure out the most popular favorite books or anything like that. What I did instead was watch the videos I would have watched anyway, and I decided to pick favorites based on the creators that I genuinely watch so much and really enjoy. Initially, I was trying to stick to books that I already owned on my TBR, but it ended up being a half and half situation where two of the books I did already own. One book I bought specifically for this vlog because I wanted to anyway, because the creator inspired me that much to want to read it. And then the fourth book I did end up getting from the library. I personally picked 3 myself, and then I left a few options on a spinner wheel to pick my fourth book. So let me run through the books really quick. So the first book I decided to go with is because 1, I owned it, and 2, it was on so many people's lists that I watched. So I saw it on McKenna Loves Content, Mayokor, it's Allie. Allie Do Is Read. I've never said her channel name out loud. Her name's Allie, and it's a little spin on All I Do Is Read, so it's Allie Do Is Read. It's cute. I just never said it out loud until now. Anyways, Scotty Cherie Reads, Literary Mad Max, and Ashley's Little Library. These are all creators that I watch quite often. Scotty Cherie Reads is one that I've recently stumbled upon her channel, and I really enjoy her content, and she had it on her favorites list as well. So this was kind of a no-brainer because so many of the creators I watch had this on their list. So the first book is When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. I'm not going to go into the synopsis for any of these books because I'll talk about them through the vlog. The next one, I definitely needed to get a book off of Peyton's list from Book in Hand. She is a content creator that I sincerely watch every single video of. I really love her vibe. She's super chill. Really enjoy their stuff. So I had to, of course, pick their absolute #1 favorite book of 2025. I watched the vlog that she read it in, and the way she talked about it made me want to read it so badly. And that is Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. This was their #1 book of 2025. She did make a different favorites list for horror specifically, but I just wanted to go with her overall favorite. So this ended up being the pick. One creator I watch that has the absolute most unique content that I watch in terms of she reads books that I hear nobody else talk about. She is my girl I go to for literary fiction specifically. The way she talked about this book just brought tears to my eyes immediately, so it was kind of a no-brainer. She does a fantastic job at talking about books. She reads some quotes from books, and I personally love that. And that is Sam over at Super Blomper. She reads a lot of just general fiction, literary fiction, and a lot of weird stuff, and I just really enjoy her book analysis and the way she speaks about books. And she has opened my eyes to a lot of books that I otherwise would not have known about. But the one I decided to pick off of her favorites list is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Yeah, Lockwood. I specifically bought this for the vlog because I had a feeling it was one I was going to annotate, especially considering the passages that Sam herself read. It was definitely going to be one that I thought I would want to mark up. And then the fourth book. So I could not decide on a fourth book. So I made a spinner wheel. I'll put a picture of it here. We're not going to spin it yet because I want to introduce all of the books that I had on the spinner wheel, why I put them on the spinner wheel, and the creators that I got those books from. So the first book was We Could Be Rats. This was both on Peyton from Book in Hand's favorite list as well as Super Blomper. I want to read this book so bad, and I couldn't justify making it a fourth book since I had already picked books from both of their channels. So I just put it on the wheel in hopes I would get it. Super Blomper did have it as more of an honorary mention, but she is the one that I initially heard about this book from when she read it earlier in 2025, and her initial reaction to the book I had already had interest in. So for her it was technically an honorary mention, but it was in her favorites video, so it counts. Then from Brooklyn's Library, I put on Julie Chan Is Dead. Brooklyn is hilarious. She's so fun if you want a really down-to-earth, super chill, like grab a cup of tea, spill the tea type of vibe. She is your girl. Love her so much. She's hilarious. And I really want to read Julie Chan is Dead, and she had it on her list, so I put it on the spinner wheel. Next book is The Merge, and I got this from Alicia Reads and Runs. I had not heard about this book until I saw it in her favorites list, but then after I saw it in her favorites list and watched like her video about it, it's popping up everywhere, and I feel like all of a sudden people are reading it. I don't know if it was a recent release or what, but she really sold me on it. Alicia is somebody who, me and her's taste is either dead on, like we either fully agree on a book or we have complete opposite reactions to a book. So I love to see what her thoughts of books are, because we do tend to read a lot of the same things. She is a much faster reader than me though, so if you're interested in somebody who reads, she averages probably like 25 books a month, but pretty much between 20 to 30 books a month she's reading. If you want somebody who reads really fast and you want to get the most bang for your buck, hear the most reviews each month, Alicia's your girl for that. Next, I ended up putting on the list Sword Heart. So this was mentioned by 2 creators. It was an honorary mention from Mayana on MyoCore, and then Miss Pizza Reads mentioned it as well. Since I made this, Miss Pizza Reads has made an actual legit favorites video. I actually snagged this from her was superlative. She made like a superlative style list for books of 2025. She mentions in that video that if you take any of the recommendations, any of the books from that video, read that one. So she has since made an actual legitimate favorites book of 2025, but it was a little bit late, so I didn't grab a book from that one. But anyways, Sword Heart I ended up putting on the list by T. Kingfisher from both of those creators. And then the last one is The Forest of Missing Girls, and I got this from In Sophie's Books. In Sophie's Books is a creator that I very recently followed, but she also has very similar reading taste to me. She reads a lot of horror. So I did already spin the wheel, and it ended up landing on The Forest of Missing Girls. I was actually really excited that it landed on this one, because other than The Merge, this was the only other book on the spinner wheel that I had not heard a single thing about. Other than from the creator that I got it from, other than from In Sophie's Books. She's the only one I had heard talk about this. I will have all of the creators that I talked about listed down below, so please go check out their channels, support them, follow them, watch their favorite videos to see more of the books that they really enjoyed in 2025. I wish I could read them all, but alas, I am only one person and a slow reader at that. Thank you so much to the creators that made the videos so I could steal some book recommendations from them. So let's get into the vlog. The fuck? I am not very far into this. I'm only on page 51, chapter 11. I put it in my Fable. I put it in Fable, and I think it is 16% of the way into it. Yeah, 16%. So I'm not far into it, but I just wanted to update you guys because now I know why people tend to keep the synopsis of this vague. All I will say is, if you don't know the synopsis, I'm going to read just the very beginning of it, and I think that's all you should go in with. So it says, one night, Jess, a struggling actress, finds a 5-year-old runaway hiding in the bushes outside her apartment. After a violent, bloody encounter with the boy's father, she and the boy find themselves running for their lives. And it becomes a story of them running from his father, who is continuously pursuing them. But obviously I'm not like super far into it, but this is already so unique, and I am so excited to see where the rest of this book's gonna go and what it's gonna do. It does definitely feel a little bit more campy compared to some of Nat Cassidy's other works, but not as silly goofy as Rest Stop was. But this has a little bit of that to it, where I feel like if it were a movie, the practical effects and stuff would be great and zany, but there is also some deeper, darker underlying themes going on as well. And there is content warning in the beginning. I'll show you guys in case you're curious about the content warnings. I don't read them. So if you want to read that, pause it, give it a go. But I really loved the first chapter of this book, which particularly stands out because we're introduced to the little boy, and it just shows how important books are in general. And this little boy seems like he had been very sheltered and very isolated, and he discovers a book. It almost like made me not teary-eyed, that's dramatic, but a little bit. It made me feel a little bit sad about thinking about what childhood would be like without imagination and without pictures and color, and being sheltered from all of that is sad. And maybe that's what the rest of the story is going to be, because I have a theory of what's happening, but I'm not going to share it because I'm not going to tell you guys if I'm right or wrong. But I have a theory of what's happening, and I think imagination has a lot to do with it, and childhood imagination, but how that imagination can become very dark based on circumstances and trauma and stuff like that. But the first chapter was beautiful and heartbreaking, and I loved it. I will say, if you're interested in this book, I would recommend doing the physical book or the ebook. I don't think that the audiobook would be able to portray what I think some of the book is doing, some of the nuances, I guess, of the formatting style, of different approaches in the writing that I think are very intentional. For example, in that first chapter, this is on the first page. So the little boy is talking about how he knew what he was doing wasn't allowed, and that it was bad and dangerous. And bad and dangerous were both capitalized in that scenario. So I just think that there's some interesting, very intentional things going on with even just the text itself. There are some tongue-in-cheek moments, some funnier moments, but so far I am loving this. I'm so excited to see where it goes. One thing I will say is there's a lot of words on these pages, and I know that sounds like such that TikTok, but this is a big formatted book. This is not the normal size of a paper book, or of a paperback rather. This is a big version of a paperback book. And then when you look at the pages, the font is tiny, the margins are tiny. It takes me 5 minutes to finish one of these pages, which I'm not complaining about, but I did notice there's a lot of words on these pages, okay? So this is only technically a 84 page book without the afterword. But this could easily, I think, be a 400 page book if it were formatted like most other books are. But yeah, it's the pages are big, the margins are small, the words are small, so. But it also makes the chapters less pages, which makes me inclined to read a little bit faster, because I'm oh, well, this chapter is only 5 pages. I'll read that real quick. And then I get through that. I'm oh, this chapter is only 6 pages. I'll read that real quick. This one's only 2 pages. I'll read that real quick. So it ends up making me read more in one sitting than maybe I would have with sometimes if a chapter is really long, I'll just read that chapter and be all right, I need a break. But with this one, I tend to read probably even more than 30 pages at once, just because it doesn't feel like I'm reading 30 pages at once. You know what I mean? So yeah, not far into it, but I see the hype already. I see why it has stood out so much for so many people. It already seems extremely unique, and I'm really excited to see where the rest of the story goes. I have officially finished When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. I didn't give you guys any more reading updates because honestly, it's one of those books that you kind of have to wait until you have all of the information. I feel like it was very thriller-esque in a way, because you're trying to figure out what this means, how this is connected, this, that, and the other, and you don't really find out until the end how everything completely connects. So I just didn't really want to update you guys until I had all the pieces and parts and could actually just figure out how I felt about it. But I did end up really enjoying this. Like I said, I think it is better to go in with less information, so I'm going to try to keep this one brief. But it does lean into a little bit more of the wackier side of horror, but there's still very gruesome and gory body horror scenes throughout it as well. But I really loved this idea of imagination. It kind of interweaves this idea of childhood imagination and how much fear can change our imagination, and how that manifest further as we are adults, and how it kind of starts to more so be anxiety, and how it ends up kind of feeding into some other bigger issues. So I really liked how imagination was kind of the foundation of this book, and I thought that the references that the book has along the way was very interesting. I loved how some of the references were used, because I could then see how the book itself, the story itself, was very much inspired by those references, which I won't say because that kind of, leans a little bit into too much information in my opinion. So what else? There are some like daddy issue themes throughout the book. Oh, there's also a little dash of grief in there. It's not a fully grief-driven story, but there is this undercurrent of grief throughout the whole thing, which also ties in, again, with daddy issues for the characters. And there's quite a bit of philosophical and ethical dilemma, particularly by the end, which I thought was really interesting, because I do feel like that part of the story, there's no right answer, and it just led to a lot of thought-provoking discussion, in my opinion. So, because it's like, what would you do in that situation, and whatever. So I really enjoyed the story overall. I am giving it 4 stars. I do think for me, there was a couple of areas that had a little bit of a pacing problem. We have a detective character, and some of his input into the story, I guess, just didn't have me as latched onto for some of the story. There was a couple of random chapters that would jump into a super random POV, and it would just be for that chapter. And while I liked some of them and it brought an interesting bigger picture to the surface and to the story, some of it just kind of messed with the pacing for me. So the detective and some of the pacing in general, the ending felt a little bit dragged for me. But otherwise, I did really, really enjoy this, and I highly recommend it. I can definitely see why it is on so many people's favorites. I do think it's a very unique story, but I think you have to be prepared for it to be a little bit wacky while also a little bit heavy. So just know that going into it, have your expectations set up correctly. But yeah, so highly recommend it, really enjoyed it, but it is a 4-star for me. I am on page 133, chapter 8 of Blood Over Brighthaven. It's about a third of the way in. So I'm reading this because of Peyton from Book in Hand. Totally love her content so much. This was her absolute favorite book of 2025. So I obviously had to go with this one. This was kindly also gifted to me by one of my friends, Carolina. She got it for me for my birthday. So shout out to Carolina. She said this book changed her brain chemistry, and she hasn't been able to stop thinking about it since reading it. So thank you so much, Carolina, for getting me this. First, I have to say, this book smells amazing. It smells like the Scholastic Book Fair, the few couple page catalog you would get for the Scholastic Book Fair and the Scholastic Book Orders. It smells like that. It smells like just classic book. And I don't understand why books don't smell like this anymore. Like, all books do not smell like this. But this is what all books used to smell like, I feel like. And I love it. So as soon as I opened it, it felt very nostalgic. Anyways, the story itself. We are following our main character. I want to say Sayana. I've been calling her Sayana in my name, so hopefully that's how you say it. But we follow our main character, Sayana, and she is a woman mage who is studying at a university, which is not very popular for women to do. And she decides to audition for a spot as a high mage, which a woman has never been a high mage, and they pretty much only invite a woman to audition for a place in the high mage hierarchy every like 10 years or so, just so they say that they do. But she is somebody who is extremely dedicated to magic, to studying it. She's just very research driven, just very targeted in and honed in on her studies and kind of herself. She's quite a bit of a self-absorbed character, which is definitely very purposeful. It's pointed out by multiple secondary characters, and you're following her, so you're getting her line of thought. So she is quite a bit of a self-absorbed person, but she does end up making it into the high magistry, which is not a spoiler, it's talked about on the back. So she ends up being able to be a high mage, and she's the first woman to ever accomplish this. And she ends up getting a unlikely assistant from one of the people that are very much a refugee community within this city. What is her main city called, actually? It starts with a T. Tierson? I think it's called Tierson. Tyron. So the city is Tyron, and it's actually marked off by this huge globe-like force field of some sort, where it's protecting the city from what is called the Blight, which I don't fully understand quite what the Blight is yet. But the story opens up with one of our other main characters, Tamil, and he is trying to pass a frozen lake. He is on the outskirts of Tyron. He's out of that force field, that protective force field around Tyron, and him and his community are trying to seek refugee in Tyrons, and they are trying to cross this frozen lake, and it is extremely dangerous, not only because of the lake and the conditions of the atmosphere of the winter and all of that, but also because the Blight. And the Blight is seemingly this very bright light that can just completely disintegrate a person. If it touches them, it rips them to shreds, essentially. And the very first chapter, the opening of this book, is so heavy and so sad as you follow this person and these multiple people trying so desperately to survive. I have so much underlined from that particular chapter. It's called The Field of Flowers, and when you realize why it's called The Field of Flowers, it's just like heartbreaking. And that chapter was so well written. But then after that chapter, that's when we start to follow Sayana. But anyways, those two characters do end up crossing paths. I will say I do wish, at least as of now, we were getting more from Tamil. I don't want as much from Sayana, while I do appreciate her story and what she's bringing to the table in terms of a complex, unlikable, but also very realistic person and human and character. While I like her parts of the story, I just want a little bit more from Tamil's perspective as well. So up to this point, I do wish we had more of him and his side of the story, because he is now living in Tyron as a refugee. And we see how much that group and that community is mistreated, how they're spoken about, and how Sayana herself has a lot of very bad prejudices against him and his community, and how they are stereotyped, and how Sayana unknowingly and ignorantly feeds into those stereotypes, and how her views have been shaped by those stereotypes and those prejudices that she's picked up. So in that way, she is a very unlikable character, but you also want her to do good because she's the first woman to be a high mage. So you see her struggles, but she's, again, very self-absorbed. So she's not really providing the refugees, and Tamil in particular, she's not really providing them the grace that she herself wants, and she's not really providing them the opportunity of being themselves, of, you know, hearing their stories or whatever. She's not giving them the treatment that she herself wants. So she's a very complex character, and I think it's very well done because you're rooting for her, but then you're also mad at her at certain points. So I think it's a very interesting, complex way to go about a character. So I really appreciate that. Anyways, there's now this potential mystery-esque thing to be solved where there might be governmental corruption and some secrets and lies that are being spewed. And that's kind of where I feel like the plot's gonna go. The world itself is very interesting. It's very industrial revolution, if it had magic kind of situation. So what they have is a spellograph, which is pretty much like a typewriter. And magic is limited to how you type in spells into the spellograph. So it's just really interesting and complex, and you get a lot of information about how it works, but it's very interesting, and I'm really, really engaged with that. Just at this point, I do wish we had more of Thamel, and that's kind of my only complaint as of right now. Otherwise, I'm really enjoying it. And obviously, I do hope that Sayana has a really good character arc where she starts to realize where she is falling short of how she thinks about these refugee people in the community and all of that. So I'm hoping that that ends up obviously being part of her character arc, because if it's not, I will be mad at the end, but I'm assuming it will be. Hopefully. If somebody told me, because I didn't know going into this, but if somebody told me that it was kind of based in this very industrial revolution, somewhat steampunk situation, I probably would not have been interested. Honestly, that does not seem like something I would like, but surprisingly, I am liking it. And I think it has to do with the fact that we are so embedded in the research. It's almost like an academic feel. It almost feels a bit academic in that way, in that research way. So that has kept me very much engaged. Definitely glad that I picked this up. I will say on the back, it says that it's for fans of R.F. Kuang's Babel, which I have not read, and I have teetered on being interested in or not being interested in it. I do like the idea of it, so maybe depending on how this works out. I mean, I can't imagine at this point this being under 4 stars, honestly. So yeah, this might end up inspiring me to pick up Babel later on in the year, but we'll see. First things first, I gotta finish reading this. I finished Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong, and just wow. The emotional roller coaster that this book is something. It's incredible. I am going to give it 4.5 stars. Something is holding me back from giving it 5 stars, but this was a truly phenomenal work. In the terms of Sayana, our main character, Sayana, our main character is so frustrating. She is such a frustrating character. She made me want to beat my head against the wall on multiple occasions, because she is the epitome, in the beginning of the story, at least for at least the first half of the story, she is the epitome of white feminism, where she is so concerned about her standing in her oppression, and she cannot see past that. She cannot, again, give other people, other minorities, the grace that she expects to be given. And while you're rooting for her in terms of her being the first woman mage and, you know, this, that, and the other, you do want her to do well. She just is so frustrating because she is very much also completely manipulated by stereotypes and propaganda and these narratives that have been spun around the Quen people, which are the immigrants in this world. So it's such an interesting read in terms of I was still so invested in the most frustrating character I have ever read. And I am somebody who likes to read messy characters, unlikable characters, but she just was written so differently, I feel like. I don't know, M.L. Wong really accomplished something with this. If Sayana doesn't frustrate you, there may be an issue to work out internally. But yeah, she is really frustrating. So I did look at some other people's thoughts on it, just because I was debating between a 4.5 and a 5 star. So sometimes if I'm between 2 ratings, I like to read those 2 versions of ratings to kind of see how I align with. Like, yeah, I do kind of agree with that. Maybe that is more appropriate to give it this, that, or the other, whatever. Anyways, sometimes I do look at other reviews to kind of help me finalize a review. Not super often, not with every book by any means, but this was one that I was kind of struggling between the 2 ratings for. But in doing that, I saw some of the very low reviews, and a lot of them mostly are about the fact that she is such a frustrating character. So absolutely do not read this if you cannot see the purpose of a frustrating character, if you cannot get past her not being a good person for like half of the book. There is a turning point, and the turning point, it's like midway through the book, and I did not see that coming. I did not see the revelations coming. There were so many, I don't want to say like twists, but kind of like so many plot points that I just didn't attempt to guess. So I was very surprised by some of the directions that this book went, but I really enjoyed it. It was a great ride. I do think that the pacing was really good. It is very philosophical in a lot of ways. It asks a lot of questions. It's a lot of our characters having internal conflicts and asking questions, and not all of the questions have answers, or a lot of them just don't have straightforward answers. There's multiple answers, and there's so much nuance within the story of these conversations, and it's just so poignant right now with the conversation of immigrants and refugees, and in particular in the US, what we're experiencing right now with ICE. ICE is completely dehumanizing. ICE, as well as the awful administration right now, are completely trying to dehumanize a whole group of people, of immigrants, and making them seem like these monsters and these animals. And it is just atrocious. It's disgusting. It's vile. It's abhorrent. I know you're not going to see this vlog for a while, but today it was brought to light that they used a 5-year-old boy as bait to get potential other family members so that they can detain them. And just what they were doing is disgusting. It's just on the level of monstrosity. It's heartbreaking. I'm going to have a bunch of resources linked in the description down below that are particular to Minnesota, because Minnesota's having a particularly hard time with their ICE enforcement right now after they murdered a woman on the street. The woman's name was Renee Nicole Good. A week before that, ICE agents actually murdered a man named Keith Porter, and since filming this, they executed Alex Preddy on the streets of Minneapolis. Fuck ICE. And I will look for others as well. So I don't have them all on the top of my head right now, but I will delve into and find some more resources for places you can donate for educational purposes, information on what to do if ICE is in your neighborhood, and how to help your fellow neighbors and your fellow humans from being safe and staying safe. It's just, yeah, it's disgusting overall. But anyways, this book is just so poignant with that in particular, and it just really very much aligns currently with what is happening. So it was a very emotional read in that way. Again, the opening chapter is just so heartbreaking and just so good. But I just find overall this book is super relevant. So I have a ton of notes. So I want to make sure I touch on all the things I want to touch on with this book. In terms of how ignorant Sayana is at some parts of these books, like I was literally physically wincing at some of the stuff she said, even some of the stuff that was said to her. So again, the author just did such a good job at creating such complex, dynamic characters. And even Tamil has some, I don't want to say issues, but he deals with the fact that he raised his niece and he doesn't really know if he did her right. He did right by her, and he holds on to anger and stuff like that. So it shows so many facets of what being a human is. Going back and forth with information you've been given, being angry, being desperate, being sad. Every emotion that you can think of is felt throughout this book, and was felt by me as I was reading. Oh, I did mention like the turning point for Sayana and the turning point of the revelation of what was potentially corrupt about the world could not have come sooner, because I was almost ready to be like, okay, I can't listen to this anymore. So it could not have come sooner. It was like perfectly timed where I was just about done with Sayana, but I held on. And yeah, that turning point was crazy. It brings up a lot of conversation about how easy the narrative is manipulated by people in power, again, with how they are trying to shape these immigrants to look, but even with events that happen in the world. just the way that they're so quick to make the narrative and have it be like, these immigrants are the bad people, this is the person you should be mad at, and having people turn on themselves because they just spew these lies, and the way people just latch onto it and repeat the same buzzwords and just repeat the same hate and this mob mentality. And it's crazy to see the brainwashing and how effective it is and how much it's working. It's just, I'm getting emotional now. So anyways, but this book, you see the mental gymnastics that some of these people go through to continue to land back on what they want to land on, back on their preconceived notions, on their biases. You physically read and watch the mental gymnastics. So it's a very frustrating read because that's very much what today is and how talking to people is and how debating human rights. Like, human rights should not be a debate, but it is. And it's just extremely frustrating to be on this side of the debate. So it is very bleak and depressing and hopeless in a lot of the book, but the way it ends is so impactful, and it comes full circle, and I totally love how it ended, because I was scared it was going to go in a different direction. I was scared there was going to be a different thing, which had a little dose of it in there, but which is kind of maybe why it's a little lower, but it didn't do it to the full extent, which I know that's like nothing if you haven't read this book, but I thought some character dynamics may have gone a different way, and I'm glad that they didn't, is what I'm saying. Hopefully that makes sense to people who have read it, and also doesn't like give any spoilers for people that haven't. So yeah, it touches on so much. It touches on genocide, on immigrant treatment, on dehumanization, on eugenics. I didn't expect the conversation of eugenics to come up, but it did, and it was again handled in such an interesting way. But it was like a focal, like a isolated part of the book. It wasn't throughout the whole story, but I love that that was even part of the conversation and that got brought up, because again, that's another issue in terms of like pro-choice and all of that. Corrupted government, controlling history and narratives, pushing stereotypes and ignorance, religious exploitation. So there is also an aspect of religion to this story, which I think maybe that is also why it ended up being lower, not because religious things were involved. I like that theme, and I like that that was brought into the conversation, but the religious stuff got a little bit muddy for me. I think I was kind of confused because there's like two different, I don't know, sanctions. I don't know how religion works. There's two different branches of religion, and I got a little lost in the sauce with that aspect. But I do like how it shows how religion is interpreted and again manipulated in order to justify actions and this, that, and the other. It all ties back to each other. So I like that that was brought in. So religious exploitation and bad faith stats. It also had a moment where stats are purposefully manipulated and given in a way to make a certain group look one way when that's not really the true story, that's not the full context, and that. So again, another thing we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Some more themes. There's a lot of themes, and I really love it. Stealing other people's cultures and traditions and knowledge and claiming them to be your own, trying to erase their existence and history with no regard. Again, this very dehumanizing conqueror colonialism. So a lot of themes that are the themes are on the nose, but I think that they're important. Unfortunately, I think that the people who should hear about this won't really read it. So that's what kind of sucks too, is while this is so insightful, it's also, for me, just putting into one complete story all the frustrations that have been happening. And I don't, unfortunately, think people that should read this will read it and get the messages that they should be getting from it. But nonetheless, really, really great book, really great story, so many amazing themes to explore and talk about. And I think that the author accomplished so many themes so well, because again, even in me talking briefly, it can get so messy, and that's what they want. They want it to be messy. They have so many things going on, so the conversation can't stay contained in a way. It can very easily branch off into all these tangents, and then we get distracted and this, that, and the other. But she was able to really contain the themes and the story and you know, keep the focus sharp, which is really commendable in the particular climate that we are dealing with. And again, the background of the magic was so cool. And the magic was very, again, mechanical, industrial, steampunk, which aren't words that I would have liked otherwise, but it just really worked well. And I thought it was very interesting. And it has a great tie-in of this academic feel where you really get to learn the nitty-gritty details and intricacies of the magic and how it works. So, that was a lot, but I really did enjoy this. I am giving it a 4.5 stars. Didn't quite hit the 5-star territory for me, but highly recommend it if you're okay with a purposefully extremely frustrating character. But you know, not gonna be for everybody. Also, I did wish that there was a little bit more from Thamul's POV. We did get a few chapters here and there. We get him in the beginning, maybe 2 or 3 in the middle, 1 at the end. And I almost wish we got more of him, but you know, that's just not what the point of this story was. It was to highlight the hypocrisy and the white feminism and all of that. Speaking of, if you want to check your feminism, a really great book that really challenges white feminism in itself is Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. Really great read, really challenges what people define as feminism, and it tries to extend the conversation where feminism is also about other topics that aren't as talked about. It's about food security, it's about poverty, it's about equality amongst a lot of other things that aren't always necessarily brought up in conversation where feminism is concerned, but these should be topics that a feminist cares about and is also trying to bring to light and find some solutions. So highly recommend that. If you do the audiobook, Mickey herself reads it, so I think that that's very impactful. That's personally how I read it. I did a little bit of a mix because I had a lot of highlighting in the book itself, but I also listened to the audiobook. Great book, so highly recommend that as well on the topic. But I gotta go because I'm running late now. My battery's dying, but I will see you guys with the next book. No One is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. So I have started this. I am on page 51. I think it's about a quarter through the book because I think it's just over 200 pages. So I knew going into this, based on Sam's review, that part 1 of this book was very different than part 2 of this book. And what sold me on reading this book was some excerpts that she read, I think mostly from part 2. So at this point, I'm kind of waiting to get there, but it is really interesting, but very different. So the book is actually written as a bunch of vignettes, and they're very, on surface level, weird and bizarre, but it is pretty much the story-ish. It's not really like a linear story. There's not really a true storyline going on here, but we are somewhat following a woman who has an online presence, and the vignettes are pretty much her scrolling through social medias and just random thoughts she has throughout the day, and a lot of them revolve around what social media and being online has created, the way people now interact because of online presence and this boom of social media. The politics, there's a lot of politically charged things within this book as well. And it's just like a lot of not random, but like a lot of thoughts without fully fleshing out a thought process. But in that way, it's very thought-provoking. I mean, this book really touches on anything and everything around almost just the social atmosphere that we're living in, how we talk to other people, how we connect with other people, the issues surrounding our livelihood at this time. It just briefly touches on a lot of that. So I've been annotating it quite a bit because it is, again, quite thought-provoking, but there's a vignette that very much seemed to be making somewhat of a commentary on how people kind of mask or act or almost like perform in social settings. There's a lot of commentary moments about kind of how our collective mind changes and how we're losing a lot of individuality, but how quickly our collective mind changes focus. Like one day this person online is the bad person, next day we're talking about this, next day this thing's going viral, that kind of thing. Touches on manipulation of language. I mean, there's like so much going on in this little book, but again, it's not delving super deep into any of that, but it just brings up observations and thoughts, and it kind of starts a potential conversation. And I don't know, I find it to be very profound at times. Obviously, with so much, it's almost like a short story collection in the way where there's so much going on that you're obviously going to connect with some of it, but not all of it. Like certain vignettes, I'm like, damn, that was like super deep. Other vignettes, I'm like, I don't know what we're trying to say here. I don't really know what the intention was behind this one. But moving on. And then the next one, I'll be like, wow, I really feel that. And I particularly am resonating with quite a bit of this book because, again, most of it revolves around social media and online presence. But I'm particularly resonating with that because in 2026, I have made an active choice to very much distance myself from social medias. I deleted 2 social media accounts. I have been very much limiting my time even on the social media accounts that I do still have, because I've just noticed, for me personally, I just felt like every time I logged into something or scrolled something, I was going to eventually get triggered to some degree. Like, I mean, I don't want to be dramatic. I'm not punching holes in walls or whatever, but it just seemed like I was always getting irritated in some way. I was either getting rage baited or I was seeing the way people were talking to other people or about other people. And I have recently had a very, I don't know if I want to say epiphany, but I've just noticed that a lot of people don't give a lot of other people grace the way that I particularly do. I believe that there's a lot of things to consider with context, and I feel like context is not something taken into account a lot of the times. People are just super quick to judge somebody based on their own personal thoughts and lifestyle and everything like that. Like, I feel like a lot of people lack the ability or just don't want to take the time to try to understand that other people have different circumstances, and there's just a lot more nuance to being a human that I feel like a lot of people, or at least the people that I was running into on my social media platforms, weren't really giving people the grace of complexities and nuances and context and all of that. Anyways, so I was getting very overall irritated with like bean soup theory, pretty much. Like bean soup theory was just all my platforms were. I was just seeing bean soup theory play out time and time again. And it was getting to a point where I felt like it was declining my mental health. It made me feel like I don't want to talk to people. It made me feel like I didn't want to talk to people or interact with people. So one thing that a few of the vignettes have kind of brought up was this idea that we are so connected, but so disconnected at the same time. Like, we have never been more connected with the rest of the world, but at the same time, we have never also been so disconnected from actually interacting with people and humans in real life and just having a connection with an individual person. It's a lot of mob mentality lately, and a lot of, I don't know, just like, I feel like people want to be mad about stuff. And I get it, because there's a lot of bullshit going on right now. There's a lot of negativity, and there's a lot of malice and a lot of ill will and just a lot of stuff compiling to bring people down. And I understand why people are angry, but I just don't want to act on my anger as much as I used to want to. I used to be very reactive, and if I was angry, everybody was going to know it, and this, that, and the other. But as I'm growing up, I'm trying to, find other facets. Anyways, all of that is to say, which nobody asked about any of that, but all of that is to say that I've been kind of connecting pretty deeply with this because of I feel like I've had a lot of these thoughts very recently and a lot of these observations very recently. But again, it doesn't really flesh it out, so there's not any solid conclusion, which honestly, most of these discussions wouldn't really have a solid conclusion to anyway, or like a solution or anything like that. I think in that way, it's this like would be a good book for discussions, like a book club or something like that. But again, you're going to connect with some of it, but not all of it. I mean, absurdism is brought up, how much we lack concentration anymore, and with, again, going in hand with this addiction to social media and our phones and scrolling, doom scrolling, brain rot. I mean, everything is kind of brought into this book at some point in some way. And I'm only 51 pages of the way in. So with that said, it is quite an exhausting book to read, I will say. It literally feels like you are scrolling social media. So if you're somebody like me who has recently been extremely fatigued by scrolling in social media, this almost feels like that. So it can be very exhausting to read. So I can only sit down and read this maybe 20 pages at a time. Beyond that, I'm kind of like, I'm exhausted. My brain is dead. So it's a type of book that I personally need to take in smaller doses. So it's going to take me a little bit longer to get through it. So yeah, there's a lot of political stuff that it touches on. There's a lot of cultural references. This very much is a modern day book. If somebody like this book would kill a Victorian adult, if they tried to read this, they'd be like, what the fuck is this? Like, they would have a brain aneurysm. It's just very much a book for this day and age. So if you're not into a book that's going to feel very planted in the year of 2026, or I think this was technically written in 2021. This was published in 2021. So it feels like a 20s era, like a 2020s era book. I mean, it still feels relevant today, 5 years later, but anyways. I wrote down some more themes. So it talks about the constant bombardment of never-ending arguing that seems to happen online, which is one thing that I personally was fatigued over. The constant debating, the virtue signaling, sharing and posting, like what people decide to share and post and like how that looks and whatever. Constantly busying our minds, never really focusing on anything, but yet absorbing everything. And then again, I already said, but somehow equally being the most connected to the world while also being the least connected to humans. So yeah, it's very interesting. A lot going on. A lot of discussion to be had through this book. It would be an interesting one to see other people's thoughts on, but as it is, I know that coming to part 2, the story does shift a little bit, but right now it's very centered around the online world. So it's interesting, but yet exhausting, but very thought-provoking and witty a lot of the times. And yeah, I'm curious to see how I will feel the rest of my way through this. So yesterday I finished No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. So to start, the rest of part 1 was a lot of the same. It ended up touching on, I'm trying to find my post-it note. It ended up touching on quite a few more topics like school shootings, propaganda, watching family members become so radicalized they're actually against your human rights and stuff like that. But there's also like funnier, less serious topics that are brought up. There's a lot of funny moments as well. Like there's a whole vignette about eating ass, and it's pretty funny the way that it's written. But so it's a good mix of very serious topics, a mix of highlighting the absurdism that is being chronically online, and then having some funny moments as well. So really the first part of this book touches on everything, everything and anything that we are currently experiencing in the online world and with this new era of being so connected yet so disconnected. So it's about the absurdism of online. And like I said, it is a little exhausting to read because it does feel like doom scrolling. So it's hard to say I enjoyed it, but I really appreciate the impact and the artistic nature of what part 1 is. Now, part 2 is a total tone shift. Part 2, our main character, which this is a what is it called? A semi-autograph, where the part of it is true and it's part of our author's actual story. Particularly part 2 is about our author's true story and is somewhat memoir-esque, but there is a lot of fiction thrown into the story as well. So it's partially a lot of truth. So in part 2, the true part is that our main character, I guess technically Patricia, finds out that the baby that her sister is pregnant with has been diagnosed with this genetic abnormality that makes it where she will not be compatible for life for long. So all of part 2 is about that. It's a complete shift and halt of what part 1 was, and it's focusing now on this family coming to terms with what this means for their future, what this means for the baby's future, trying to navigate the medical environment that they've been thrust into, trying to navigate the laws. Actually, this takes place in Ohio, which I live in Ohio. Trying to navigate and come to terms with the laws that are not allowing them to make certain choices, and eventually trying to enjoy what little, very limited time they end up having with this baby, who is actually diagnosed with Proteus syndrome, and that is a genetic mutation where your cells pretty much never stop. Your cells are supposed to stop growing at a certain point. You know, you develop your nose, it's supposed to stop. You develop this, it's supposed to kind of like stop or halt at least, or slow down tremendously. But in this particular genetic mutation, that does not happen. So the baby's head ends up being very, very large. It is actually the genetic mutation that the Elephant Man, also his real name is Joseph Merrick, but known as the Elephant Man, it's actually the mutation he had, which he ended up living a pretty long life, all things considered. I believe he died at 27. I will correct myself if I'm wrong. I think he ended up living 27 years. This baby does not live that long, so I will tell you now, it's not really a spoiler because this isn't really, I don't know, I don't consider it a spoiler. Be aware that the baby does live on the earth for a little bit, but does not make it through the rest of the book, okay? So you do end up following the story of this family trying to enjoy the life that they're having with this baby and trying to see the joy and try to ignore the impending end. And they end up coming to the end and how they're dealing with that. Because of the format, the vignette format, it is done in just such a poetic way. Some of the observations our author makes is just inspiring and beautiful, but also heartbreaking. And this book was just such a journey. But yeah, I mean, the second half it's heavy, it's somewhat hopeful, but also heartbreaking. And I cried. You saw. I cried. I was bawling my eyes out by the end. So this was just overall a very interesting story. And I say story loosely because, again, a lot of this is true. And I also say story loosely because I feel like this is more of like an art, like an art piece. It's hard to just say that this is a book. And I'm having a hard time rating it. I almost don't want to rate it because here's the thing. If I'm being 100% honest and straightforward, part 1 was kind of like maybe a 3-star if I just rated part 1, because while it was very interesting, it brought up a lot of conversations. Again, it was a bit exhausting to read, and it dragged a little bit for me because I was just getting fatigued. But also with the setup and format of the stories and of the vignettes, you know, some of them felt very profound and hit me very hard, and then other ones were just kind of like, okay. I personally couldn't connect or get something from every vignette, which I think is just kind of the nature of that type of format. Same thing with like a short story collection. You're going to connect with some more than others. So that's kind of what happened to me in the beginning, in part 1 of the story. Part 2, though, is a 5-star on its own, but you can't have them separate. I completely realize the necessity of having both parts. Part of the art of this story is having that juxtaposition between how somewhat insane being chronically online is and how much that shifts and comes to a complete halt when something tragic or something that just demands your attention happens in real life. So that's kind of the point of the shift. And that's why we're dealing with a book that has two totally different vibes throughout. So I realize you can't really appreciate the impact of one without the other. And they both have a lot to say. So it's a difficult one to rate. I think I would... I don't know. I don't know if I will rate it, but I'm kind of leaning towards, if I do rate it, it's going to be like a 3.5 because it's just a really, really hard one to decide what to do with something so arbitrary as a rating system for stories, which again, I don't necessarily think this is just a story. I think it transcends the idea of that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's definitely, particularly the first part, is definitely going to stick with me for a long time. I have quite a bit of annotations. So for the most part, I enjoyed my story and I do feel like it opened up my mind, which I think is always a great thing with a book. But I didn't always enjoy my time. Sometimes I was exhausted. So it was a very mixed bag. But I do recommend it with you knowing exactly what this book actually is and actually entails. But again, it is like very hard to read the second part, especially with like losing a child and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I feel all types of way. This book made me feel all types of way. It made me feel angry, made me feel heartbroken, it made me feel sad, it made me laugh, it made me feel validated. It made me feel all sorts of emotions that no other book really has, especially to the range that this has. So I don't know. That's kind of my messy, incoherent final thoughts of this. Maybe it's a 3.5 star. Maybe I won't officially rate it, but we'll see. I'm just gonna, sit on that for a little bit. So that was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Thank you so much, Sam, for exposing me to that book. I'm looking forward to reading other recommendations. Moving on to the next book.
For C and K, my sisters, whose roots are forever tangled with mine. Chapter 1. No one ever warned me how much of my life would feel like playing pretend.
I am on the mend from a migraine attack, so I'm still a little bit out of it. I still have like an inkling of an ice pick in my head. So if you feel like I'm a little bit off, it's because I am. Anyways, I started The Forest of Missing Girls by Nichelle Giraldus, I think is how you say her last name. I did start the audiobook and they said it in the beginning, but I kind of forgot to clock it. So as I said, I'm listening to the audiobook. I am 36% of the way in, so a little bit over a third of the way through. And going into this, let me tell you guys what this is about. Actually, I didn't give you guys a synopsis yet. So the story follows our main character, Ophelia, and she has recently broken up with her boyfriend who's living in LA, and because of the breakup, she is going back home to, I don't know what state, but it's like a rural-ish area, and her house is surrounded by this really dense wood that is pretty ominous and whatever, and their town is kind of known for having a lot of girls go missing. And actually, let me see what the synopsis says online. Okay, yeah, so she goes back home and then another girl ends up disappearing, and she is trying to figure out kind of what's going on. Like, her mom's a little bit weird, vibes are off, okay? So we very quickly realize that Ophelia and her mother have not a strained relationship, but kind of. It's like almost a passive-aggressive type of relationship where Ophelia feels very much under the thumb of her mother, judged by her mother. Her mother feels a little controlling, will comment on if she has the right shade of lipstick on, kind of like stuff like that. And so it's a little bit of a strained-ish relationship. Ophelia feels like she's lived her whole life to kind of meet her mom's standards and do what her mom wants her to do. So there's this element and theme within Ophelia of she doesn't really know who she is because she feels like she's always just kind of been whatever anybody else has wanted her to be. So there's like that going, which is kind of interesting. The exposition, though, of the book, I'm not gonna lie, the beginning of this book was incredibly dull to me. Very mid. The exposition was just like, here's a bunch of background on my childhood and all these stories, and just all of these stories back to back about all these different things from when she was little. And it just felt a little bit dumpy, I guess, in that way, instead of, you know, I just prefer background and information like that to be given in a little bit more of a interesting, somewhat natural feeling way. Like if Ophelia, you know, is walking around her childhood home and looks out the window and like looks at the trees, and then she reminisces right there about this story that happened when she was young. Instead, we were just getting these stories back to back to back in no real particular order of stuff that Ophelia saw or witnessed or felt like or whatever. So the exposition felt very, dare I say, amateur. I do actually think that this is a debut novel. Hold on. If it's not, I feel bad, but the beginning did feel like a debut novel type of beginning. Yes, this is a debut novel, and unfortunately, I will say, clocked that. But anyways, so yeah, the beginning was really, but I don't know. I don't know how I'm feeling about it. And I did notice there's like a lot of description about what everybody in this town looks like, particularly women, because there's really seemingly no men. Her dad's like very much not involved. He's there, but he's like not involved, and she addresses that like he's just never been involved in their day-to-day, how was your day, what are you doing type of situation. He's just like never been actually available, even though he's always around. But so it's a lot of women, and there's a lot of description about how these women look, hair color, eye color, clothes, style, the way that their lips are colored and shaped. And I've just noticed there's a lot of superficial description of all of the women in the story, and I don't know if that is going to come into play with what ends up being kind of the reveal of what's going on here or what, but if it's not, it's obnoxious. While yes, you want to, you know, describe how characters look, it's like very excessive at the same time. And it's like, maybe we should spare some words for more interesting things about the story, or make it more interesting. I don't know. That was just something I noticed. So right now it's an observation, but if it doesn't end up being purposeful, it will be annoying. If it does end up being purposeful, I'll feel vindicated because I noticed it. Anyways, so there's that observation. And yeah, that's kind of it. I definitely have theories of what's going on. I'm holding out though. Sophie said that it gets very, very weird in the end. So that's really the one thing that I'm holding out for. As of right now, it's very, very mid to me. It's very mediocre, which I am not surprised about, to be honest, because it's a thriller horror. And I notoriously have not had a good time with thrillers. I'm still obviously trying to give them chances, but I just have not enjoyed very many thrillers at all. There's just something about knowing that I'm just waiting for a reveal. The fact that the whole story in my head and in my experience relies on what the revelation is just like not a type of story I like. I feel like that's my experience with all thrillers. It feels like I'm just reading them to see what happens instead of like reading them and enjoying what's happening on the page on any given page, if that makes any sense. I think that's my gripe with thrillers. I don't really know. I don't know what it is. But Sophie said it gets weird, and that's what I'm waiting for, because if it gets weird enough and it starts to like lean more into horror and less of this like thrillery thing, then it might get interesting. Like if it switches gears at a certain point and it's not just like dragging me along the story the whole time, you know what I mean? But there is this like interesting dark foresty thing going on, which is not revolutionary considering the title. I'm sure you kind of assumed that. But it does seem to potentially have this dark, cottagey, sinister energy going on. I think that's my update right now. I do think that potentially missing persons in general, like a missing person element in a story, may not be for me. It's not something I've explored much of, but it is something I've never been interested in. And now that I'm reading this, I'm kind of realizing more so that it's not very interesting to me. Although I do think that this has it's not, I will say, like kind of partially my theory, but I will say this doesn't seem like it's necessarily like a kidnapper situation, but I think that there's a little bit more potentially supernatural, magical things going on. And I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave my theory at that. I don't think this is strictly reality based, which I'm hoping it's not. If it's not, it'll be more interesting for me. Okay, I'm just gonna cut myself off there, okay? Because, yeah, my headache is definitely still not gone, and it's making it difficult for me to string words together, if you haven't noticed. So that's my update on that. I will continue to listen to the audiobook, and I will get back to you guys when I can. I finished The Forest of Missing Girls by Nacelle Girardes, I think is how you say it. That's a hard name for me to say. So I finished that. I finished the audiobook, and overall it was fine. It was fine. I'm giving it 3 stars. I think it had some interesting ideas, but I think because it was a debut, maybe the author played it a little bit safer because I just wanted it to do more. You know, the core of the book, the themes are very much about these standards that we live by in our mother's eyes, that we are very much the mirrors of our mothers that give very high pressure and have very high expectations, and kind of being forced to live for somebody else's expectations and standards, and just overall living under the scrutiny and judgment of our mothers, well, some of us, of our mothers. I'm saying it generalized, but obviously not every relationship is like that. That should go without saying. But this is about those types of relationships, and particularly as it pertains to our looks and our bodies and very superficial stuff. So my observation of the fact that there's a lot of description of people's superficial looks was astute, and it was for a purpose, but I don't know. I find that it was also superficial in itself. It just didn't do anything new, really, and it just didn't push it far enough for me. And again, I think that has to maybe do with the fact it's a debut, but this is the type of story I would have wanted it to go much farther with that idea. Otherwise, I played it very safe, and it just felt very superficial and didn't feel very nuanced or new or exciting. The writing was fine. Everything about this book was pretty much just fine, and I wanted more from it. One of my complaints, I will say, is that we end up getting chapters from the past, and some of them are very far in the past. Other ones end up kind of running parallel with the current time, but it ends up being from a different POV. And I think that that really, really hindered the pacing of this book, particularly by the end. At the end, we really shouldn't have got any of this additional POV because it was at that time running at the same time. So it was very repetitive because it was like, here's what's happening from this person's POV, here's what just happened, but from this person's POV. And it felt just super redundant. So it really hindered the pacing, especially towards the end as things are starting to amp up. People are figuring things out, and it's trying to get to this suspenseful climax. Jumping into this other POV just really hindered that, and it really didn't add too much to the story for me personally. And I unfortunately also very much didn't like the choices that the narrator of the audiobook made with that POV. That feels mean, but it's my truth. That narrator for that POV made it particularly grating for me to listen to. And on top of it, didn't really add as much as I feel like the author thought it would. in fact, it just ended up hindering from the pacing. So didn't really like that. I think it would have been much more suspenseful in the end had those POVs been cut. But yeah, other than that, it was fine. Nothing really to write home about. Sophie said it gets weird at the end. I obviously have a very different gauge of weird. Weird in itself is a very subjective term, and it's very, it's on a spectrum of how weird something is. For me, this wasn't that weird, but it definitely is weird light. So if you're somebody who maybe wants to read books that have a little bit of something weird going on, this might work for you. But if you're somebody who likes weird books, this is not weird enough for the actual weird book people. You know what I mean? So I think that's all I want to say for this spoiler-free section. So I'm going to now get into spoilers slowly, because for me personally, I, again, am not really a thriller reader. So this book really probably wasn't meant for me. Sophie sold it really good, and I'm really glad it was a 5-star for Sophie. It had some stuff going against it for me personally, but that's why I included it even on the wheel, because I like to still try new things all the time. Even if it's something that I don't know and I don't feel like confident about, I still like to try it, because you never know, you could be surprised. So getting into spoilers, rewinding back a little bit, my theory, I think actually would have been more interesting. So because Sophie had kind of preemptively said it was weird, I was thinking a little bit more weird. So I thought that the girls were going missing, the women of the town were taking them and pretty much sacrificing them to the forest, this very creepy, sinister, sacrificing the girls to the forest, to like Mother Nature, and the girls were becoming literally integrated within the forest, and like their bodies would morph into vines and blah blah blah. That's what I thought was gonna kind of be the reveal, and it wasn't that. Instead, it does this kind of Frankenstein inspired thing, which sounds good because I'm somebody who loves Frankenstein inspired stuff, but I mean, it again just didn't really do anything nuanced or different, but it kind of gets a little inspired by Frankenstein, where there's this woman that they call Mother. I was like, oh, Mother Nature, but no, it's just they just call her Mother because she's a doctor who killed her husband back in the day because he I forget if he cheated on her or left her or was just like eyeballing some pretty women. And she herself is like, I'm not that pretty, so I wasn't surprised, but I hoped it would be different, whatever. So she killed him, and then she ended up stealing girls to take pieces and parts from other girls to create the perfect girls and create perfect daughters. I think she ended up having 4, maybe 5 daughters. And our main character, Ophelia, her mother is actually one of Mother's creations. But yeah, so the story is just kind of Ophelia figuring that out, us figuring it out. The second POV is from Ophelia's mother's POV. The big mother, creation mother, ends up stealing Ophelia's sister, Evangeline, I think is her name. Ends up stealing her, so Ophelia and her mother have to go to the mother to kind of steal her back, which was kind of also... So Ophelia's mother ended up poisoning Mother, capital M Mother, and then she was kind of like dying from the poison, but Ophelia's mother had also drank some of it because they have the same wine, whatever, and she wanted to, make sure that Mother actually drank the wine. So she drank it too. So Ophelia's mother's dying, can't breathe, whatever. Then Mother starts dying, whatever. So she's like on her way to death. And she's like, wait, I can save your mother. Like, get the antidote or whatever. And Ophelia has a gun, ends up shooting capital M Mother. And that's it, really. Ophelia's mother's fine. She gets the antidote or whatever the hell it is. Recovers fully. Evangeline is fine and not, cut up in any way. She ends up actually not even remembering anything. So only Ophelia and her mother and like her mother's sisters are the only ones who know what actually happened. And that's it. So yeah, if you wanted to know, if you wanted to know that. There was like a little bit of a supernatural thing, I guess, in terms of the fact that the doctor was able to assemble these girls and create a new being, but like it does not get into detail about any of that. So again, it's just like not super interesting. Like on paper, it sounds like an interesting idea, but it felt like just still an idea, and it didn't feel fleshed out. It didn't feel pushed far enough. It didn't feel detailed enough. And yeah, I don't know if I will, but I would consider reading another work by this author potentially. But I mean, if she continues to write in thriller genre, probably, maybe not. But anyway, so that is The Forest of Missing Girls by Nicole Giraldes. So that is everything for this video. Don't worry, Sophie, I will still take book recommendations from you. A lot of the other books you had on your list were ones that I was already interested in, so I wanted to purposely pick one that I hadn't even known about. So that is it. That is everything for today's video. Shout out again to all of the creators that I mentioned in this video. Again, I will have them all linked down below. Please, please, please go give them a follow, support them. They're wonderful booktube creators. If you made it to this point in the video and have nothing else to say but want to let me know you were here, leave a tree or like a fern emoji in the comments down below to kind of match the cover of the Forest of Missing Girls. As always, thank you so much for spending some of your time with me while I sit down and talk about books. If you haven't yet, please give the video a like, subscribe for future content, turn on the bell notification, all the fun YouTube things that help your girl out, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!